Well, it's a privilege to be here and to have my two compadres here with me, William and DeAndre. We had lobsters at Legal Seafood last night, so it was, for me, it was a personal thrill to see them in bibs. And it's the privilege of my life to know these two characters and DeAndre and William and all the thousands of who have come through my world and life in the last 34 years. People like Louis Bettis, we were talking about him earlier. I know Karen knows him and William remembers him, and he was kind of a force of nature and did a lot of things at Homeboy, worked there for a while. And now he's selling insurance, so which is kind of the graduation from Homeboy, apparently. But he was quite the public speaker, and he liked doing it, you know, and he was often called upon to speak at schools and stuff because people liked him, and he was really kind of dynamic. And we went out to eat, just the two of us, he and I, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you know, you have to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. So, what the heck brings you out here? I don't know. It's not me. Really, it isn't. It's kind of a vision and a hope and a longing for the world to look differently than it currently looks. We want the world to be less divided than it currently is. We want there to be union and exquisite mutuality with each other. We want connection. It's what we long for. And we want to create and be participants in the creation of a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Because we know in the deepest part of ourselves that that's God's dream come true. We want to imagine with God a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We want to dismantle the barriers that exclude. Psalm 15 was part of the scriptural basis for this lecture series, and it begins where it says, "Who will dwell in your sacred tent?" And we know that the answer is every damn buddy. Everybody ought to be dwelling in this sacred tent. We imagine a circle, and then we imagine nobody standing outside the circle, standing outside the tent. Everybody's in, everybody's welcome. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we inch our way out to the margins, as Pope Francis invites us to, because the margins can't get erased unless we go out there. And then you check under your feet and you notice that the margins are getting erased because you precisely have felt the invitation to locate yourself there. And the margins are about something very particular. It's about standing with people. It's about standing with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. It's about standing with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. It's about standing with the easily despised and the readily left out. It's about going out of your way to choose to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless we believe that we belong to each other. And so you go to the margins and you brace yourselves because people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." You go to the margins and suddenly other voices get heard, and it makes a difference. It matters. And yet none of this matters unless we kind of understand truly what kind of God we have. I had a spiritual director once who said, you know, we need a better God than the one we have. He was a Jesuit. But of course he's right, because we've allowed our God to become puny and tiny. We settle for a partial God, a lesser God. There are really two kinds of gods, I think. There's the God we actually have, and then there's the God we've settled for. There are lots of examples of that. The God we actually have, I think we remember, there's so many examples of this. When Dylan Roof killed all those people in Mother Emanuel Church, it was a week later, I think, when family members stood in front of him, family members of the victims who had died, and said, "We forgive you." Anybody in earshot knew that you were in the presence of the God we actually have. But then 9 months later, when they sentenced him to die and called it God's justice, you knew we had wandered back to the God we've settled for, the partial God, the lesser God. And we have to catch ourselves because it's essential to our own ability to stand at the margins and stand with those there. Now, the homies have taught me everything of value, and often enough things come to me by way of their illuminating mangling of the English language, you know, and I always discover things like the title of that book. You know, I encourage you to buy it, but The Barking to the Choir comes from a homie who came into my office, and he was coloring outside the lines, and he was hard-headed and late and missing and attitudinal, and I'm running it down to him. I'm telling him about all this, and he goes, "Relax, you're barking to the choir." And I remember I wrote on a piece of paper, title of next book. And somehow I was going to force that book into that title no matter what it took. And so I figured out a way to do it, I hope. So go ahead and buy that book. But once I remember a homegirl named Lisa, one of our trainees, just as these two guys are part of the 18-month training program, she came at the end of the day and she wanted to introduce her man to me. And she brought him into the office and she said, "This is my sufficient other." And I said, "No doubt." I think one of the things that allows me to kind of be on the road as often as I am is that I have a CEO now, Tom Volso, good guy, who comes from the corporate world. And we're a $19 million annual operation, so it's nice to have somebody else worried about cash flow and such. So that's nice. So one day I was in my office and one of the trainees came in, a homie gang member, and he said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you know, she's beginning her administration period." I said, "Well, you know, I just finished mine, so I kind of know what she's going through." But my favorite one, and more to the point of our topic, is I was celebrating the Eucharist at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and in a big old gym with like 500 gang members. And, you know, I'm vested. I have my stole and my alb, and I'm kind of, during the liturgy of the word, I thought, well, I'm going to close my eyes and just hear the word proclaimed. And so I had the sheet, you know, that they have that has the readings in English and Spanish. And so I'm not going to read along. I'm going to just have that resting on my lap. I'm going to close my eyes. And the homies got up, did the first reading. And then the guy got up to do the psalm. And he had kind of an overabundance of confidence, I thought. And he got up and he said, "The Lord is exhausted." And I look at the sheet, what the hell? And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. You know, because truth be told, the exalted God, I don't care what you're going to say scripturally, the exalted God is the God created in our image. Because, I don't know, I'd like to be exalted if I was God. It's like Annie Lamott always says, you know you've created God in your own image when God hates the same people you do. And that's the God you've settled for, you know, the God who kind of is exalted, judgmental. You are not measuring up. This is the God we'd be. But the exhausted God, oh my God, that's just wonderful. That's extensive, it's spacious, it's oceanic, it's concerned about you. Images abound of the God we actually have. You have to be on the lookout because God is leaving us hints. So a week ago, I buried my 92-year-old mama. And she lived a good long life. She had 8 kids and very sharp till the very end. You know, she was watching so much MSNBC at the end, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. And just hilarious. And death for her was just not anything to be feared. You know, at one point she said, oh, I'm so happy to be going home. In fact, at one point we were talking about death and she says, I've never done this before. You know, like she was about to skydive, you know. And when she died, you know, it was my sister. I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers. And the sister said, we're going to go buy lunch. And I was just sitting by her bedside and she was kind of sleeping. And all of a sudden she let out this tiny, wondrous gasp. Glorious. Breathless delight. And she left us. And no one in earshot of this sound could ever fear death again. Skydive. But in the last 2 weeks, we are all coming in and hanging out with her. And at one point, she, one of my older sisters and the caretaker was tending to her, and we were in the living room, and maybe 5 of us there. And they come out and they point at me, and she's asking for you. Wow, I didn't even know she knew I was really there exactly. And so I'm walking this narrow hallway to get to her room, and I'm thinking, wow, what does she want to confide in me? Maybe, I don't know, maybe she wants to go to confession. So she's staring at the ceiling with a big smile, and I walk up to her, hold her hand, I go, you asked for me? She goes, oh yes. Make me a Manhattan. Well, she hadn't had one of those for a little while, and it was 5 o'clock. So I go into the living room, I tell my sibs, I go, she wants a damn Manhattan, you know, so we all pour ourselves a drink, and she can barely hold it, but we're clinking her glass, and we're raising a toast, and we're laughing like crazy. And heaven won't be different than that moment. Kinship and connection. Anyway, I told you all that to tell you this. In and out of coherence, in and out of sleeping, in and speaking code sometimes. She'd wake up and she'd spot, and she'd do it to a different person of my sibs. Oh, you're here. You're here. And the God we actually have, that's the only agenda item, period. That's it. I realized that that's it. All God wants to say to you is, you're here. You're here. And the minute you receive that tender glance, you only want to be one thing in the world, tender glance. But we cloud everything by this cuckoo notion of who God is and measure up, and boy, am I disappointed in you again. And it's too bad, because we miss out on the God that only wants to say, you're here. You're here. And then we look at God and we go, oh, you're here. And that's exactly what happens. Then you want to be in the world who God is. Jesus knew this. It was the mystical connection that Jesus had. He'd go to the desert and all he could hear was God saying, you're here. It wasn't programmatic. It wasn't, here's what you need to do. That's the God we actually have. And so in the covenantal relationship, God says, as I have loved you, well, the God we create in our own image says to us, love me back, because I'm an exalted God. No, it says, as I have loved you and extended this tender glance to you, you must extend this tender glance to the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And God identifies these three subgroupings of the poor, because these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they've suffered in this exact way, God thinks they're trustworthy guides for the rest of us, to get us to the kinship of God. I had what we would call in the biz, a hardcore gang intervention worker who's in the streets working with gang members. And he was in Houston, a good guy, a felon, a former gang member himself. And he pleaded with me after a talk I gave there. How do you reach them? And I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? And that's the whole point. When I lived in Somerville for 3 years and went to school at the Weston School of Theology, you could take courses at Harvard, so I did, and my teacher was Henry Nouwen and Parker Palmer. It was a team, the team taught this thing. And Henry was kind of having a hard time. He only lasted a semester. I'm glad I got him. But then he went to the L'Arche communities after that. But it was a course on ministry, and some woman said, what is ministry anyway? And he was exasperated, and he said, can you receive people? That's it. But we have this notion of what it has to look like. That we go to the margins to make a difference. When in fact, we're invited to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different. Now that feels completely backwards. But that's how this is supposed to be with the widow, orphan, and the stranger. There are guides. They go ahead of us. And it anchors us in the humility of Jesus that wants to be connected and to enter fully into this exquisite mutuality. I know we start with service. Our kids start with service. There isn't a school that doesn't have a service component, and that's good. But it's where you begin. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, which is the place of exquisite mutuality and connection. At Homeboy, I'm not the great healer, and those gang members over there are in need of my exquisite healing. The truth is, we're all cry for help. We're all in need of healing. It's one of the things that connects us as members of the human family. And so we don't want there to be any distance that separates us. Service provider, a service recipient. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. You bridge the daylight that exists between you. So there was a homie Kara knew and I knew named Dreamer, who nobody got more job opportunities through that place than this guy. I knew him since he was a little kid growing up in the projects. Knucklehead, got into a gang. He was a very smart kid, super intelligent, with a dangerous sense of humor. I don't think he ever actually went to school that I can recall, but maybe he did. I doubt it. But we'd find him jobs. We'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our enterprises at Homeboy. But he'd always gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of. And then he'd wander back to me. He's doing fine now. He's in his 40s, married, has a house and kids and a good job. But in his early 20s, he was a kind of a frustrating yo-yo. So, so this one time he had finished a 4-month stretch probation violation in county jail, and there he is sitting in front of my desk, and he says what gang members often say, "This time, it'll be different." And I said, well, okay. So with him sitting there, I call a friend of mine named Gary, who has a vending machine company, and he hired homies in the past, so I'm hoping against hope maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he says, "You tell that guy he can start work tomorrow." That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the very next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in front of my desk. I couldn't even believe my eyeballs. And I said, "Híjole, Madre Santa, I can't believe you're sitting here." And he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck and he waves it proudly. "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me. My kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job." And I said, "Well, gosh." "Who?" And he looked at me strangely and he said, "Well, God, of course." I said, "Oh, sure. Oh, that's right. That's right. That would be God." "You thought I was going to say you." I said, "No, gosh, God's number one." And we just fell out of our chairs howling with laughter. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. It's mutual. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he was the best listener I've ever known. If you were talking to him, nobody else existed. He was laser beam focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But once famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual." And that's the goal, where you receive people, where you allow yourself to be reached by the widow, orphan, and the stranger. You don't go to the margins to save anybody. Saving lives is for the Coast Guard. You don't go to the margins to fix anybody. Your choice, I think Jesus offers to us, is to save a life or to savor it. I'm going to vote for savor. Because what happens when we savor is we receive people. And we allow our hearts to be altered by them. And nothing is the same again. All of us are invited to become enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. But you don't do it by holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up. We're allergic to that at Homeboy. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth, knowing that my truth is your truth, and your truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth, and here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, particularly on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But at Homeboy, we know that you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. The great scripture scholar, late scripture scholar Marcus Borg, used to say that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. If you go to the Acts of the Apostles, there's this odd sentence, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." It suggests that the measure of the health of any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I can remember years ago I got invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it was an all-day gang-in service at a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5. I figured, maybe I'd give the keynote or speak at lunch or close the thing or something like that. So I said yes, and I bought my ticket. And a week before I was to fly, I pulled out the letter, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker the whole damn day, 9 to 5. And I remember I said to myself, oh, hell no, I'm not going to do this. So I invited 2 homies in, trainees like these 2 guys, Andre and Jose, and I sat them down and I said, look, you're flying with me at the end of the week to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time. Well, so we go to Richmond, and I never heard their stories. Jose got up first, and he was, he was 25 years old at the time. He was this 18-month training program. He was somewhere like month 16 or something towards the end, and he had become a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. Now he was helping, the younger homies with their addiction issues, and gang member, been to prison, felon. But he also had a long stretch of time as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he got up in front of 600 social workers. He began by saying, well, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers did what you just did. They audibly gasped. And then he said, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said to them. And literally, we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door. And the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt, the blood would seep through. And second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the 3rd t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? Then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, "I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds?" And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is, if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. I once read in a interview somewhere, I think it was at the back of Vanity Fair, they asked Whoopi Goldberg this question: "What living person do you most admire?" She could have said anybody. And she said Pope Francis. And then she said this: "Yeah, he's going with the original program." Now, I'm going to take your laughter to mean you recognize what that is. You know what the original program is. Everybody knows what the original program is. Everybody. We're invited to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. Fortunate for us, there are only 4 things that Jesus took seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional, compassionate, loving kindness, that's one thing, and acceptance. And it's clear that that's the original program. That's what we long to live. That's what we desire deeply to see. And that's what we want to be about. And so we hear the God that says to us quite clearly, you're here. And it makes us want to do only one thing: roll up our sleeves and to follow Jesus. And to take seriously what he took seriously. I remember I was interviewed once on a Christian broadcasting network by this nice lady. And she asked me, "What do you do at Homeboy?" And I told her all the things, 15,000 gang members a year walk through our doors, and they're always looking to catch the crumb of hope that falls from the table, and they'll want to be part of the 18-month training program and free tattoo removal and therapy and case management and 40 classes that they can take. And we have a school. We have 9 businesses where enemy rival gang members work side by side with each other, and we want to be at Homeboy what we think the world is invited to become: a community of kinship. And she kind of made a face when I finished my long litany of things. She said, "Yeah, but how much time do you spend each day at Homeboy, praising God?" And I didn't really know what to say, so I said, "All damn day." Let me just say, I don't think she liked that answer very much. But it begs this question, and I'll end with this story. And then I'll invite my two pals up here to help us with the questions and such. But it begs this question, what kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? So it occurs to people sometimes, universities mainly, to force their students to read my book against their will. I'm not complaining. And we were just at Regis in where? Weston. And they had forced their freshmen to read my book. Tattoo's the first book. So we'll come back next year when they force them to read Barking to the Choir. But so my alma mater, which lost today, ruined my whole bracket, Gonzaga. I had them in the Final Four. Hello. Anyway, well, that just ruined my whole talk right there. I can't go on. But so Gonzaga invited me to come and speak, and the whole incoming freshman class, and they said, would read Tattoos on the Heart, and we're going to have a big venue, like 1,000 people, so can you come and speak? I said, sure. And they said, can you bring two homies with you? And, you know, if people are going to pay for it, I do it. And I said, sure. And so I always pick homies generally in this way. Not always, but generally. I always pick homies who are from rival enemy gang members just so that they have to share a hotel room just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. And I was at LAX not that long ago, and two older vatos were with me, and one of them said, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, why, yes, it's a requirement. We're coming home on American, so don't worry about it. So, so I picked two homies, Bobby, an African-American gang member who at the time worked in the bakery, and this homie named Mario, who at the time worked in our merchandise store where we sell our logo stuff. And I've done this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times with men and women. I've never done it with anybody who was more terrified of flying than this guy Mario. He was just absolutely petrified. I mean, in fact, he was hyperventilating, you know. And we hadn't even boarded the plane yet. So we were at Burbank Airport, which is kind of a small airport, and big bay windows, Southwest Airlines, big planes, but they don't have that hermetically sealed chute to get on the plane. That you have to walk onto the tarmac like you're the president. And you walk up the steps to the front of the plane, or you walk up the steps to the back of the plane, which is the big feature at Burbank. So Mario and I are sitting there, Bobby's off walking somewhere, and it's early morning, and so our plane arrives. And this is the plane we're going to get on. And I tell Mario, that's our plane. And I think, wow, he may actually die before we climb up those stairs. And so then our flight crew arrives, and the pilots, and there are two flight attendants, females. Both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, oh, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that in my 30-year history at Homeboy Industries, Mario is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there, and I think that is saying a lot. So he's all sleeved out, his whole arms are covered in tattoos, his neck is blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's in his coffin, people will see that it says the end. And so I'd never been in public with him, and Bobby was off somewhere, and I was trying to calm him down, walking him through the airport, and people are like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. And I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting, because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow, and ask anybody there, who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works here, they won't say me. They'll say Mario. He works, sells baked goods in the bakery over the cafe, sells the baked goods over the counter. Kind, gentle, tender soul. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. Receiving the tender glance, being the tender glance. So we get to Gonzaga and, the big talks that night, Tuesday night. What they don't tell you at universities ever is that, they have 93 other talks planned for you, trying to get their money's worth, So this class, this meeting, this lunch, this meeting would happen today too. So it was all day long. And so I tell these guys, look, I'm not going to speak in any of these classrooms. You get up and tell your stories, and I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. It's, Mario and Bobby get up, and they do a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse, and I would not have survived a single day of their childhoods. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. So I got them up before I gave my talk, and they told their stories, like you guys did today, brilliantly at Regis. And then I got up and did my thing, and then I invited Bobby and Mario up to stand on either side of me, as I will in 2 minutes, with DeAndre and William. And I said, yeah, questions? And yes, ma'am. And a woman stands and she goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gates for Mario. So he's this tall, skinny drink of water, and he walks up and he clutches the microphone, and he's just trembling. Yes. And he's just terrified. And she says, well, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone, and he can just, he's exuding this trembling emotional rise, and he's getting overwhelmed, and he's also getting a hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell answer he's going to give. When suddenly he blurts out, and as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his retreat, his microphone clutching, trembling retreat. And now I know he's losing his battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand. And they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. But he had returned them to themselves. Which shouldn't surprise us, because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. Widow, orphan, stranger. They allowed themselves to be reached by Mario. They took seriously what Jesus took seriously. they felt in the core and center of their being this voice that said with breathless delight, "You're here, you're here." And 1,000 total perfect strangers stood and they looked at Mario and they said, "You're here, you're here." And that's the original program. And so you go to the margins and you receive people. And a community of kinship such that God might recognize it gets created. And pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. We don't go to the margins to make a difference. We go there so that the widow, orphan, and stranger make us different. Thank you very much.
Well,
Your name?
first of all, my name is William, and I want to thank you guys for welcoming us here. You guys have been very, very, very nice, and I appreciate everything you guys have done for us here. A warm welcome. Thank you very much. I met Father G probably about 15, 16 years ago, and if I would have listened to him back then, I would have saved my mother and my family a lot of pain. Myself, I didn't want to listen to him. I took the long and the hard road. You know, people died. People went to jail for life. People real close to me, and I didn't care. I kept doing what I was doing. I kept saying to myself, "That's not gonna happen to me. I'm smarter than that. I'm better than that." You know, they were slipping. They weren't on their toes. That's why that happened to them. Well, that could happen to me too. You know, it could easily happen to me too. And Father G is a good man. Homeboy Industries helps a lot of people. My mom, my aunt actually, believe it or not, she was a nun. You know, my brothers were Marines. I was the only one that was messed up. I was the only one that couldn't get it right. So, this last time I went to prison, I said to myself, you know, my mom, she wanted to come visit me. You know, my mom's about 73 years old. She wanted to come visit me. I'm about 13 hours away from LA. And I wouldn't send my mom to visit me for him because I was tired of putting my mom to the pain of standing in that line. She's a little old lady now, you know, standing in line in cold weather or hot weather, whatever it is, just so she can come up and see me, asking my aunt to drive her up there to come visit me, you know, because she never wanted to give up hope on me that I would change. You know, she never did. And that means a lot to me, you know. That's a big reason why I kept working to change for myself and to better myself. My mom never gave up on me, you know. So when I got here to Boston, my mom told me how proud she was of me, and it really hit home because mom's getting up there in age and she's never been able to say that she's really proud of me, you know. And finally she's able to say that now, and it feels good. I was released from prison in October, and as soon as I got out, I went to see Father G. And I told him this before, I want to do this. He said, like you said, gang members coming all the time and say, "I'm ready, G, I want to do this." And I said it before, and just as fast as I said it, I'll talk to him, and I'll be right back doing whatever I'm doing, you know. But this time I was really serious. I'm 30 years old, and I have 2 strikes. I could go to jail easily for life if I mess up again, and I don't want to be there for life. I don't want to waste the rest of my life there. I know that I'm put on this earth to do a lot more than the things that I've done. And I see that now. And I've been working. I started off part-time. I made it to full-time. I just got my high school diploma sent into me so I can start looking into college. And I'm serious about my change. Thank you. I spoke at Regis earlier. I was a lot more nervous. I think that kind of got me ready for this. So I appreciate you guys listening to my story, and just know that you guys applauding and all this is not for a waste. I'm gonna keep going and I'm gonna do better. And you guys, next time you guys hear from me, it'll be on much better terms.
Hello, how you guys doing today? My name is DeAndre. My story is, well, I kind of grew up by myself. I had a mom and a father, but my dad went to prison when I was a kid. So I really had my mom and she had 5 other kids. So my mom used to work a lot, and so I'm the second oldest, so I try to strive for my siblings, try to make a way. So then my mom got her husband and stuff started happening, like my mom used to get abused, you know what I'm saying? She used to get beat on and I used to protect her, but I tried to protect her. I was young and I couldn't protect her, so I moved out, moved with my grandmother. And when I moved to my grandmother, she worked all day. And so when I got out of school, all I leaned on is the streets. So they taught me a lot of things I know now, hanging out, shooting dice that I love, and other things too. And that led me up going to prison, from Hawaii to prison. And I came to Father Greg 5 years ago and asked him I need a job. And when I was there, I didn't really take it seriously because I was still acting like a child. I was pointing, I just wanted the paycheck. I didn't want to learn nothing, I just wanted the paycheck. And because I wasn't serious for myself, I went back to prison. And I had a lot of time this time to think about the things I want in life. And this time, every day I pray that I need to get my kids and pray that I get out and don't stumble. And if I do stumble, let me hurry up and jump back up so I don't stay there for long. And I asked them, let me come back in. It was hard because the staff, last time I was a fool, so they like, so he said, I'm gonna hire him. So I'm gonna hire him back. So they hired me the 18 months back, and this time I was really sincere. I checked in my GD class, I'm going to school, and everything like that, and I'm trying to be close to my children. I'm battling with my oldest daughter, she's 14. She have kind of issues like running away and stuff like that and she don't want me to tell her what to do because she said I haven't been in her life. But I said, I know I haven't been in your life, but can you please give me a chance so I want to be in your life now and show you I can be that best father for you. And she said, I don't believe you because you always said, hey, you always get back locked up. I got out August 3rd last year, and I'm blessed that I haven't been back to prison and for no violations yet. So I'm pretty doing good and my kids see that. So I'm still working on the progress with my daughter so I can talk to her better now than before. So I'm getting something to her. So I thank Father G, a beautiful person, for having homeboys and building an empire and helping us get herself. That's really it. Thank you.
Thank you. So part of the thing is you're always having in your head, oh my God, I'm not sure this guy can turn this ship around. And I think maybe DeAndre was addressing that a little bit when he came back, and everyone, no. And well, yeah, that's what we're here for, somebody like DeAndre, and everybody loves DeAndre. Everybody loves DeAndre. And so it's like you want folks, everybody believes in a God of second chances. But, you know, in my head, I go, well, I'm not sure this guy can ever turn this ship around. You don't say that, but it's somewhere in the head. I've never said it about these two. But I did say it about a kid named Danny, and he was, Kara would have known him back way in the days, and he was a knucklehead and a little tiny guy, and would ride his bike, and he would kick it in the alley where those guys kicked it, and I will never step foot in Homeboy Industries. He made his solemn vow to me. And so I, would know him in the streets, but never at Homeboy. And I'd know him at juvenile hall, but never at Homeboy. And I'd know him at probation camps and youth authority. He finally went to prison just for 2 years when he was 18. And he was a knucklehead, put in work for the neighborhood, as we say, and did dirt. And went to prison from 18 to 20. And in recovery, we always say it takes what it takes. The death of a friend, the birth of a son, a long stretch in prison. For Danny, he got out of prison and his mother had pancreatic cancer and she had 6 months to live. And so he became, out of a large family of sibs, became the designated hospice caregiver. And so he was by her bedside. And all the more remarkable because this woman tortured this kid. And I watched how tender he was with her, and it was just something to behold. Even his ability to forgive her and to be with her as she breathed her last. So she died. A week later, I buried her. And a week after that, he walks into Homeboy Industries. And I watch him work with enemies, laughing with guys I know he used to shoot at because I remember. I watch him get his GED and then go on to college, take classes at East LA College. And he was inhabiting the truth of who he was, and he was finding his true self in love. And everything false and every version past was drifting away. So one day he came into my office and he says, I have to tell you about what happened yesterday. So right across the street from our headquarters is the Chinatown stop of the Gold Line. We're in Chinatown. And so he says he took the train home. And the train was packed, but he managed to get a seat. But standing in front of him, hanging onto a pole, was a guy he said was medio pedo, a little bit drunk. He was a homie because he could see tattoos on his hand. But the older guy, he didn't know who he was. And so Danny was wearing a sweatshirt like this, Homeboy Industries, jobs, not jails. And the drunk guy says, hey, you work there. And Danny doesn't know whether to engage this guy or not. He just kind of, yeah. Is it any good? Danny shrugs and says, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'll ever go back to prison because of this place. So then Danny stood and he reached into his pocket and found a pen and a clean little piece of paper. And he wrote the address of Homeboy Industries on the piece of paper. And as he's telling me the story, he says, I couldn't believe I knew the address by heart. So he hands the address to the little bit drunk guy and he says, you come and see us. We'll help you. And the guy studies the piece of paper and he says, thank you. And the train stops and the guy gets off and Danny finds his seat. And now Danny has a hard time finishing the story. He says, what happened to me next has never happened to me in my life. Everyone on the train was looking at me. Everyone on the train was nodding at me. Everyone on the train was smiling at me. And now he can barely speak at all. And for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And all we did in my office was weep. Because I don't know what the hell you're supposed to do after that. I didn't save him. But I think he found salvation at Homeboy. I didn't heal him. But he encountered a community of healing at Homeboy. I didn't rescue him from anything. But together, we found rescue. Thank you very much.